first hound was released before Beatrice had finished saying she was innocent. Duke Edmund watched from the stone terrace while his guests laughed at the full-figured maid standing alone inside the hunting enclosure. That morning, his most valuable stallion had been found dead, and Silas Vale had discovered Beatrice's kitchen knife beside its body. Now 12 trained hounds were being unleashed as her punishment. If she runs, she confesses, Silas announced. Beatrice's gentle face remained still as the pack charged. She whispered only one word, Bracken. The lead hound skidded to a halt, pressed his scarred muzzle against her hand, and knelt. The others formed a silent circle around her, facing the nobles as if protecting her. Then Bracken began whining toward the northern woods. Clenched between his teeth was young Oliver's missing glove, streaked with blood and coated in fresh black pine resin. The Duke's nephew had disappeared 3 hours earlier. But how had his glove reached a forest path locked for 2 decades? For several seconds, the only sound in the enclosure was the hound's heavy breathing. The laughter had died so suddenly that Beatrice could hear rainwater dripping from the terrace roof. Lady Margaret, the Duke's widowed sister and Oliver's mother, gripped the stone railing until her knuckles whitened. That belongs to my son. She rushed down the steps, but Silas moved faster. The master of hounds entered the enclosure and reached for the glove. Bracken bared his teeth. Silas stopped so sharply that mud splashed over his polished boots. Beatrice laid one hand between the dog's ears.
Easy,
She murmured.
he will not take it.
Silas's face darkened. Control that beast. I believe she already has, said one of the older guests. A few nobles exchanged uncomfortable looks. Only moments earlier, they had wagered on whether Beatrice's large body would make her too slow to escape the pack. Now the woman they had mocked stood untouched among 12 kneeling hounds while Silas, who had trained them for years, dared not approach. Duke Edmund descended from the terrace. His riding coat was still stained with rain from the morning's search, and sleepless fury sharpened his features. Give me the glove. Beatrice carefully took it from Bracken's mouth. The leather was torn across 2 fingers. A narrow red stain marked the cuff, but there was not enough blood to prove a terrible wound. Beneath it gleamed a smear of nearly black resin. Lady Margaret reached for it with trembling hands. I fastened these gloves myself before Oliver went to the chapel. He complained that the left one was tighter. This is the left, Beatrice said. Silas gave a dismissive laugh. A dog found a lost glove. That proves nothing. The boy could have dropped it anywhere. Not with this resin on it. Every eye turned toward Beatrice. Silas's voice hardened. You are a kitchen maid, not a forester. No, sir. But I scrubbed the resin from the gamekeeper's coats. A ripple of amusement moved through the guests. Yet Beatrice did not lower her gaze. She rubbed the substance carefully between her fingers and lifted it toward her nose. Ordinary pine resin is pale when fresh. This comes from black pine. There are none near the chapel, the stables, or the southern hunting ground. Lady Margaret stared toward the dark line of trees beyond the enclosure. The northern preserve. That land has been closed since my father's accident, Edmund said. The outer gate is chained, and the old hunting lodge is collapsing. Then no fresh resin should be on Oliver's glove, Beatrice replied. Silas stepped between her and the Duke. Your Grace, she is trying to distract us from the dead stallion. Her knife was found beside Caesar's body. Stable boy Peter saw her leave the yard after midnight. Beatrice felt the accusation strike her again, yet she kept her voice level. Peter saw a woman in a gray apron. He never saw my face. You admitted entering the stable. I went there because Caesar was kicking his stall door, and by sunrise he was dead. A murmur rose among the guests. The cruel confidence began returning to their faces. Beatrice saw how eagerly they accepted the simplest story. The clumsy, heavy-set maid had damaged something precious and lied to escape punishment. Duke Edmund looked at the dogs surrounding her. Why did they refuse my command? Silas answered before she could. She has been feeding them from the kitchen. She corrupted their training. I fed them scraps that would otherwise have been thrown away, Beatrice said. But Bracken remembers me for another reason. She touched the crescent-shaped scar beneath his collar. Last winter, when fever had swept through the kennel, Silas had ordered the sick dog destroyed rather than risk the rest of the pack. Beatrice had hidden Bracken in the laundry shed for 6 nights, cooling his body with wet cloths, and giving him broth 1 spoonful at a time. No one in the courtyard knew that story. Bracken did. Silas knew it too. The look he gave her was brief, but it carried a warning colder than the rain. Lady Margaret seized Edmund's sleeve. The dogs can track Oliver. Let her take them north. Absolutely not, Silas snapped. The preserve is dangerous. The ground has collapsed near the old quarry. Beatrice looked at him. A drop of rain slid from the brim of his hat, but beneath it, she saw sweat shining at his temple. How do you know the ground has collapsed? She asked. Silas went still. The Northern Preserve has been locked for 20 years, Beatrice continued. You said so yourself last month, when a footman asked to collect firewood there. I have maps of the estate. Maps do not show fresh collapses. No one laughed now. Edmund turned slowly toward his master of hounds. Answer her. Silas recovered with practiced ease. One of the gamekeepers reported it. I cannot remember which. We are wasting time while your nephew remains missing. He reached again for the glove, but Beatrice closed her fingers around it. Bracken found this, she said. Let him tell us where. As if understanding, the scarred hound rose. The other 11 stood with him. Bracken sniffed Oliver's glove, circled once, then pulled toward the northern woods, with such force that his paws carved trenches through the mud. Duke Edmund looked from the hound to the woman he had just offered as prey. If this is another deception, he said, the dogs will not save you a second time. Beatrice met his gaze. If we remain here arguing, your grace, they may not be able to save Oliver at all. Lady Margaret gave a broken sob. Edmund drew the key to the northern gate from beneath his coat and thrust it into Beatrice's hand. Before Silas could object, Bracken lifted his muzzle toward the forbidden woods and released a long, urgent howl. From somewhere beyond the chained gate, another hound answered. But all 12 of Edmund's dogs were standing inside the enclosure. The answering howl came again, thin and frightened, from beyond the northern gate. Bracken sprang forward, and the remaining hounds followed so violently that 2 kennel boys nearly lost their grip on the leashes. Duke Edmund ordered the enclosure opened, then turned to his guests. The hunt is over. Return to the house. No one moved until his expression made the command unmistakable. Lady Margaret insisted on joining the search, but Edmund placed her in the care of the housekeeper and promised he would not return without Oliver. Beatrice was given no such reassurance. Silas seized her arm as she passed him and whispered, Whatever trick you have arranged in those woods, it ends with you hanging for it. Beatrice looked down at his gloved hand until he released her. She did not answer. The group crossing the rain-soaked estate consisted of Edmund, Silas, 4 armed gamekeepers, 6 kennel boys, and Beatrice at the front with Bracken. The other hounds strained behind them, their noses sweeping the ground. Beatrice's torn gray dress clung to her full figure, and mud quickly soaked through her thin shoes. Silas had allowed her no cloak, although the Duke and every man around him wore heavy wool. She walked without complaint, keeping Oliver's glove wrapped in a clean handkerchief so the rain would not destroy its scent. They passed the kitchen yard where Beatrice normally began work before sunrise, carrying coal, lighting ovens, scrubbing copper pots, and preparing trays before most of Ashcombe Hall had awakened. Several servants watched from the doorway. Some looked ashamed, others looked away. Only Daniel Mercer, the young under-gamekeeper, stepped into the rain. Take these, he said, holding out his leather field boots. Silas blocked him. Return to your post. My post is wherever his grace is searching. Daniel turned to Edmund. I know the northern boundary better than any man here except Mr. Vale. Let me come. Edmund nodded impatiently. Daniel removed his spare gaiters instead and gave them to Beatrice. They were too large, but they protected her ankles from thorns. He had respected her since the previous autumn, when his widowed mother fell ill, and Beatrice quietly carried food to their cottage each evening after completing her own work. She had surrendered half her wages to pay for medicine, and had never told Daniel who supplied the money. He discovered the truth only when the apothecary thanked him for the maid's final payment. Beatrice had asked for nothing in return. Now Daniel fell into step beside her. The howl did not sound like one of the hunting pack, he said. It is smaller. Oliver's spaniel, Beatrice replied. Pippin. Silas scoffed from behind them. The boy was forbidden to take that useless creature from the nursery. Oliver rarely obeys anyone who calls Pippin useless, Beatrice said. She knew because the 10-year-old often slipped into the servants' corridor with the spaniel under his coat. While the other maids chased him away, afraid of dirty paws on polished floors, Beatrice saved crusts from breakfast and taught him how to check Pippin's ears for burrs. Oliver never laughed at her size. Once, after hearing a nobleman call her a fat kitchen ox, he had solemnly told her that oxen were stronger and kinder than foxes. The memory made her tighten her grip on his glove. Bracken suddenly veered toward a drainage ditch. The hounds barked, but Beatrice raised her hand. Stop pulling them. Silas ignored her and ordered the boys forward. Bracken resisted, whining at a patch of crushed grass. Beatrice knelt and found a narrow leather strap half buried in mud. It belonged to a child's satchel. A dark smear marked one end. Daniel crouched beside her. Blood? Berry dye, Beatrice said after smelling it. From the blackberry preserves prepared yesterday. Oliver had stolen a jar from the pantry that morning. Beatrice had caught him, made him return it, then slipped 2 honey biscuits into his pocket, because he confessed before she asked. He came this way willingly, she said. At least this far. Or you lured him with food, Silas replied. Edmund wheeled on him. We are following the dogs because you failed to find my nephew for 3 hours. Unless you have something useful to say, be silent. Silas bowed, but his eyes remained fixed on Beatrice. Bracken followed the ditch north. The ground rose, becoming dense with fern and bramble. Beatrice noticed wheel ruts beneath the wet leaves. They were too wide for a gentleman's carriage, and too deep for an empty farm cart. Daniel saw them as well. Heavy wagons, he murmured. Recently, Silas struck the leaves aside with his boot. Old timber tracks filled by rain. The tracks lie over this morning's fallen needles, Beatrice said. Silas's jaw tightened. Edmund heard her but said nothing. They reached the northern boundary 20 minutes later. The stone wall was covered in moss, and the iron gate appeared exactly as Beatrice remembered it. Twisted bars, a rusted chain, and a black padlock bearing the crest of Edmund's grandfather. Yet Bracken did not approach the center of the gate. He pulled toward the left post, where thorny vines concealed a narrow opening beneath the wall. The answering howl came from inside, followed by frantic scratching. "Pippin!" Beatrice called. A small brown and white spaniel forced his muzzle through the gap. His fur was wet, one ear was bleeding, and a cord had been tied around his collar. Beatrice lay flat in the mud and reached through. Pippin licked her fingers, trembling. With Daniel's help, she widened the opening enough to pull him free. The spaniel immediately collapsed against her chest. Even with Oliver missing and her own life threatened, Beatrice examined his injured ear before looking at the object attached to his collar. It was a strip of gray cloth, deliberately knotted so it could not fall away. Silas snatched it first. A maid's uniform. Beatrice touched the torn shoulder of her dress, but the edges did not match. Daniel turned the strip over. 2 small initials had been stitched into the hem in white thread. B.H. Lady Margaret required every servant's clothing to be marked. It came from one of mine, Beatrice said quietly. My spare dress was hanging in the laundry room this morning. Silas held the cloth up for Edmund and the gamekeepers to see. The dogs kneel to her. The missing child's spaniel carries her name. How much more proof do you require? Edmund's face hardened, but Beatrice was watching Pippin. The little dog did not cower from her. He cowered from the cloth. Each time Silas moved it closer, Pippin whimpered and buried his face beneath her arm. Beatrice took hold of the strip before Silas could pull it away, and smelled something sharp beneath the rain and mud. It was the same black pine resin found on Oliver's glove, but mixed with another odor she recognized from the kennel shed. This cloth was not used to lead Oliver, she said. It was used to silence Pippin. Daniel examined the knot. Whoever tied it expected us to find it. A gunshot cracked through the woods beyond the locked gate. Pippin screamed, tore free from Beatrice's arms, and began clawing desperately at the stones as a child's voice cried out once from somewhere inside the forbidden preserve. Edmund drew his pistol and ran to the gate, while the gamekeepers raised their guns. Beatrice kept Pippin against her body as the spaniel shook. The Duke pushed the old key into the padlock, but it would not turn. He tried again, swore, and struck the iron with the heel of his hand. That is my father's key. Daniel examined the lock without touching it. The casing is old, Your Grace, but the mechanism inside has been replaced. Silas immediately ordered 2 gamekeepers to shoot the chain apart. No, Beatrice said. A ball could strike the stone and return toward us. Silas glared at her. Then, perhaps you would prefer to leave the boy inside. Beatrice ignored him and studied the gate. The chain was thick, yet the lower hinge had been fitted with a newer pin. Fresh black resin had been pressed into the metal to disguise its shine. The hinge, she said. Remove the bottom pin. Daniel used the narrow end of his hunting knife while 2 kennel boys lifted the gate. The pin slid free, and enough space opened for a man to squeeze through. Silas shoved past first, loudly claiming he had known the gate could be breached, although everyone had heard Beatrice give the instruction. Edmund followed with the gamekeepers. Beatrice set Pippin down, and the spaniel raced beneath the gate. Bracken pulled after him. She remains here, Silas called. She is still accused of murder. Another faint cry drifted through the trees. Beatrice lowered herself into the mud and forced her full figure through the narrow opening, scraping her shoulder against the iron. You may punish me after Oliver is safe. Edmund looked back, but did not order her removed. Beyond the wall, The northern preserve was not the untouched wilderness they had expected. Black pines had been cut along a hidden road, leaving pale wounds in the trunks. Wagon wheels had crushed the ferns, and hoof prints filled with rainwater. Daniel knelt beside one print. Shod draft horses. At least 4. Poachers, Silas said. Poachers do not build roads wide enough for loaded wagons, Beatrice replied. Silas moved closer until his shoulder nearly touched hers. Every answer you give tightens the rope around your own neck. Bracken barked from farther ahead. Beatrice hurried after him despite the pain in her scraped shoulder. The dogs led them toward the abandoned hunting lodge, a low stone building hidden among the pines. Smoke curled from its damaged chimney. Someone had been there minutes earlier. Edmund signaled for the group to separate. Daniel moved to the rear of the lodge while Silas and 2 gamekeepers approached the front. Beatrice followed Pippin around the eastern wall and found the spaniel clawing beneath a boarded window. Through a broken corner of glass, she saw a small figure lying on the floor. Oliver. The boy lifted his head, revealing blood along his temple. A rope ran from his wrists to an iron ring beside the hearth. Beatrice seized a loose stone and struck the window until the remaining glass fell inward. Silas shouted for her to stop, but she wrapped her hand in the hem of her dress, cleared the sharp edges, and climbed through. Her hip caught on the narrow frame. Laughter would normally have followed such a struggle, but there was none now. She forced herself inside, fell heavily onto the floor, and crawled to Oliver. Beatrice? His voice was weak. I knew you would come. The rope around his wrists had been tied in a double-loop knot. Beatrice recognized it from the hound's lead lines. Before she could examine it further, Silas kicked open the front door. Stand away from him. He pointed his gun directly at her. Edmund entered behind him and rushed to his nephew. Beatrice used a shard of glass to cut the rope, then pressed her handkerchief against the shallow wound above Oliver's ear. The shot grazed him. He needs warmth and a physician, but the bleeding is slowing. Edmund gathered the boy into his arms. Relief softened him for only a moment. Then Silas bent beside the hearth and lifted something from the ashes with the barrel of his pistol. It was the scorched remains of a gray servant's cap. 2 white letters remained visible on the band. BH. Another piece of her uniform, Silas said. One of the gamekeepers opened a cabinet and found a basket containing honey biscuits, blackberry preserves, and a small bottle labeled with the name of the poison used for killing vermin in the stables. Beatrice recognized the basket immediately. It had disappeared from the kitchen before breakfast. She lured him with food, Silas declared. Then she poisoned Caesar to create confusion and brought the boy here. When the search moved too close, she staged the glove for her trained dogs to find. That makes no sense, Daniel said from the doorway. Why guide us to the place where she imprisoned him? Because she intended to appear his rescuer. The hound's kneeling was part of the performance. Edmund searched Oliver's coat and found a folded note inside the breast pocket. The message was short. Bring Pippin to the northern gate. He is sick, and I know how to help him. Tell no one or Silas will have him destroyed. It was signed Beatrice Hale. The handwriting resembled hers closely. Edmund held it beside the marked cloth. Did you write this? No, Your Grace. Can you prove that? Beatrice studied the note. The imitation was careful, likely copied from the kitchen lists she prepared each morning. Yet the writer had formed the capital B, with a loop curving to the right. Beatrice's loop always curved left, because of an old injury to her thumb. More importantly, 2 tiny green flecks clung to the fold, and the paper carried the bitter odor of kennel soap. She noticed a triangular tear along the lower edge, as though the sheet had been removed from a larger page. Not yet, she answered. Silas smiled. At least she admits it. I admit only that someone planned this carefully. Edmund's face hardened. Until I know who, you will be confined. Silas pulled iron restraints from a hook near the hearth, with suspicious readiness, and locked them around Beatrice's wrists. Daniel protested, but Edmund silenced him. Beatrice did not resist. Oliver needed to be carried through the narrow gate, and any struggle would delay them. As the group prepared to leave, she saw Bracken sniff the rope that had bound the boy. The hound followed its scent across the floor, past Silas, and stopped beside a locked leather dispatch case lying beneath the broken table. Silas seized the case before anyone else noticed and covered it with his coat. Beatrice said nothing. She had seen the same triangular corner missing from a stack of kennel inventory paper protruding through its damaged clasp. Outside, Oliver stirred in Edmund's arms and opened his eyes. Uncle, he whispered. Edmund leaned close. I am here. The child looked past him at Beatrice's shackled hands. Terror filled his face. Do not let them take her. Silas stepped forward. Tell His Grace who brought you here. Oliver swallowed painfully. Someone wearing Beatrice's dress. Silas's smile returned, But the boy was not finished. It looked like her from behind, Oliver whispered. Then she spoke, and it was a man's voice. Silas's smile vanished for only an instant. The boy has been struck in the head, he said. He cannot know what he heard. Oliver clutched Edmund's coat. It was a man, uncle. He wore a veil, but his voice was deep. Enough questions, Edmund ordered. We take him home now. Beatrice wanted to ask whether the disguised man had spoken any names, but Oliver's eyelids were already closing. The rain had become colder, and the child's lips were losing color. Edmund carried him, while Daniel and two gamekeepers widened the gap beneath the gate. Silas insisted that Beatrice remain shackled. When Daniel offered to guide her over the rough ground, Silas warned him that helping an accused criminal could cost him his post. Daniel took Beatrice's elbow anyway. They had gone less than a quarter mile when Bracken stopped so abruptly that the hound behind him crashed into his flank. The pack became silent. Beatrice noticed their ears turning toward the treetops. Pippin whimpered and pressed himself against her skirts. Everyone stop, she said. Silas continued walking. We have no time for another performance. Beatrice saw a thin cord stretched across the path beneath wet leaves. It ran upward around a pine branch and disappeared behind a stack of freshly cut timber on the slope. Do not take another step. Silas's boot hovered inches above the cord. Beatrice lunged despite her chains and struck his leg aside with her shoulder. He fell into the mud, swearing. The nobles would have laughed to see a full-figured maid knock the master of hounds from his feet, but the gamekeepers stared upward as the disturbed cord tightened. Several heavy logs shifted against one another. Had Silas stepped forward, the entire stack would have rolled across the path where Edmund stood holding Oliver. Daniel grabbed the cord and held it steady. Back away slowly, Beatrice instructed. The top log is balanced on a split wedge. Silas rose, drew his knife, and cut the rope. The logs settled. He turned immediately to Edmund. Your Grace, I have disabled the trap. Whoever took Oliver intended to kill the search party as well. Daniel stared at him. Beatrice saw it. You nearly triggered it. The maid knocked me down because she knew where the cord lay, Silas replied. Perhaps because she helped place it. Beatrice looked at the knot connecting the cord to the branch. It was another double loop, identical to the one around Oliver's wrists. A streak of green paint marked the rope. The kennels used green paint to identify training lines. Kitchen cord was left plain. She kept the observation to herself. Silas had already twisted every word she spoke into evidence against her. Edmund glanced at Beatrice, then at his pale nephew. We will determine who deserves credit after Oliver has seen the physician. Silas walked ahead as though he had saved them all. Daniel remained beside Beatrice. I saw the knot, he whispered, and the paint. Do not say that where he can hear you. Why protect him? I am protecting you. She nodded toward the cottages visible beyond the southern wall. Daniel's mother lived in one of them by permission of the estate. If he lost his position, she lost her home. A lie becomes stronger when the truth leaves every honest person homeless. Daniel's expression hardened. Then we must prove it before he can dismiss us. When they reached Ashcombe Hall, Lady Margaret ran down the front steps without a cloak. Edmund placed Oliver in her arms, and the physician hurried them upstairs. Beatrice was taken through the servants' entrance, so the remaining guests would not see the accused maid entering beside the rescued child. Yet word had already spread. Servants lined the corridor, whispering about poisoned horses, stolen uniforms, and hunting dogs that obeyed a kitchen maid over their master. Mrs. Crowley, the housekeeper, removed the keys from Beatrice's belt and informed her that her wages were suspended. Her small attic room would be searched, and if she were dismissed, she would lose the servant's pension she had been building for 6 years. Silas arrived before the shackles were removed. Mercer, he said to Daniel, you abandoned your assigned boundary and contradicted me before his grace. You are suspended from duty. I joined the search with the Duke's permission. Your mother's cottage belongs to the gamekeeper's office. You have until tomorrow evening to reconsider your loyalty. Daniel stepped toward him, but Beatrice caught his sleeve. Your mother needs you calm. Silas leaned close to her. Everyone you touch loses something. He ordered 2 footmen to lock her inside the old silver pantry, a windowless room beneath the west stairs. Bracken followed until Silas struck the dog with his leash. The hound growled, and for a moment, Beatrice feared Silas would shoot him. She knelt, despite the iron around her wrists, and pressed her forehead to Bracken's. Go with Daniel, she whispered. Bracken obeyed reluctantly. That obedience seemed to anger Silas more than the growl. Beatrice spent 2 hours in darkness before Lady Margaret opened the door. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her voice was steady. Oliver will not allow the physician to touch his wound unless you are present. His grace ordered me confined. My brother also ordered his nephew saved. You have done that twice today. Lady Margaret unlocked the shackles with a key taken from Edmund's desk and led Beatrice upstairs by the back staircase. Oliver lay in his mother's chamber beneath 3 blankets. When he saw Beatrice, he reached for her. She sat beside him, her broad, gentle presence calming him enough for the physician to clean and stitch the wound. Silas stood near the door, taking credit for finding the lodge and disabling the timber trap. Beatrice remained silent until the physician asked everyone to leave. Oliver held her hand. The false Beatrice told me Pippin would die if I shouted, he whispered. Then another man came to the lodge. They argued about wagons and a ship leaving tomorrow night. Did you see either face? No, but one dropped this. Oliver reached beneath his pillow and gave her a small brass button stamped with the image of a running fox. Beatrice recognized it. The same buttons decorated the formal coat Silas wore during royal hunts. Before she could hide it, the bedroom door opened. Silas stood on the threshold, and his coat was missing its lowest button. Beatrice closed her fingers around the brass button before Silas could see it clearly. Oliver understood her warning glance and pulled the blanket over her hand. Silas entered the chamber, his eyes moving from Beatrice to the boy. Why is the prisoner still here? Lady Margaret stepped between him and the bed. Because my son asked for her. Your son also followed a note bearing her name into a forbidden forest. Oliver shrank against the pillows. Beatrice felt his hand tighten around hers beneath the blanket. Mr. Vale, she said calmly. The physician ordered him to rest. And you are suddenly qualified to speak for physicians? No. I am qualified to recognize a frightened child. Silas's gaze dropped toward their hidden hands. Before he could approach, Lady Margaret ordered him out. He bowed with false courtesy and left. But Beatrice knew he would not remain ignorant for long. She slipped the button into Oliver's palm. Keep this hidden, she whispered. Do not show anyone except your mother. It came from his coat. I know. Then tell Uncle Edmund. A missing button is not enough. Mr. Vale can claim he lost it while searching the lodge. If he learns you kept it, he may decide you remember too much. Oliver's face went pale. Beatrice closed his fingers around the evidence. You have been very brave. Now you must be careful. 2 footmen returned her to the silver pantry, but less than an hour later, Edmund ordered her brought to the great hall. The hunting guests had gone, replaced by household officers, senior servants, and Magistrate Harcourt from the neighboring village. Rain hammered the tall windows, while Beatrice stood in her wet, torn uniform, before people she had served for 6 years. Her iron restraints had been returned. Silas stood beside a table covered with objects taken from her attic room. A packet of foreign coins, 3 sealed letters, a vial of stable poison, and a folded shipping manifest bearing the name of the coastal vessel Sea Wren. Beatrice had never seen any of them. These were hidden beneath her mattress, Silas announced. Mrs. Crowley confirmed that the room belonged to Beatrice. The housekeeper's voice trembled, but she did not mention that dozens of servants possessed keys to the attic passage. Magistrate Harcourt opened one of the letters. It described wagons traveling through the northern preserve and instructed someone identified only as BH to ensure that the Duke's horse and the boy create sufficient distraction. A murmur of disgust moved through the hall. Edmund placed Oliver's forged note beside it. The handwriting matches. Because both were copied from my kitchen lists, Beatrice said. Harcourt frowned. Can you prove that? Ask Mrs. Bell whether I was in the kitchen when Oliver disappeared. The head cook stood among the servants, twisting her apron. Beatrice had worked beside her since before dawn. Mrs. Bell had watched her knead bread, prepare preserves, and carry breakfast trays. Yet when the magistrate questioned her, Silas added, Remember that lying during an inquiry is grounds for dismissal. Mrs. Bell lowered her eyes. Beatrice left the kitchen several times. To carry coal and fetch water, Beatrice said. Could she have gone to the northern gate? Harcourt asked. I cannot say. The answer wounded more deeply than open cruelty. Beatrice had covered Mrs. Bell's duties through 2 illnesses, and surrendered her one free Sunday so the cook could attend her daughter's wedding. Fear erased all of it. Silas next called Peter, the 15-year-old stable boy. He repeated that he had seen a broad woman in a gray dress, leaving Caesar's stall after midnight. Did you see her face? Beatrice asked. Peter looked at Silas before answering. No. Did you see whether she wore shoes or boots? I do not remember. You told me this morning that the person wore tall riding boots. Peter's lips parted. Silas interrupted. The prisoner does not question witnesses. Daniel stepped from the back of the hall. He told me the same thing. Tall boots with metal heels. Mercer has already shown where his loyalty lies, Silas said. 2 men brought in Daniel's leather field coat. From its pocket they produced a key that opened the replaced mechanism inside the northern gate. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. That was not mine. He provided access, Silas continued. Beatrice lured the child and poisoned the stallion. Together, they intended to expose the smuggling road only after removing any evidence connecting themselves to it. Why would we expose our own road? Daniel demanded. Because your partners refused to pay you. The accusation was absurd, yet the foreign coins beneath Beatrice's mattress and the key in Daniel's pocket gave it shape. Harcourt asked Edmund for permission to transfer them both to the county jail. Lady Margaret entered before he could answer. My son heard a man's voice. Silas spread his hands. Mercer is a man. Every head turned toward Daniel. Beatrice saw the trap close around the only person who had defended her. Daniel's mother was brought into the hall next, pale and breathless. Silas informed her that her cottage had been searched and a roll of green kennel rope found beneath the floorboards. Daniel lunged toward him. Guards seized his arms. You planted it. Your Grace, Silas said. The prisoners are violent and must be separated. Edmund looked exhausted, divided between the evidence and the people standing before him. At last he ordered Daniel confined in the gatehouse, and Beatrice locked in the old wine cellar, until Harcourt could arrange transport at dawn. Beatrice was dragged from the hall, while servants stepped aside, as if guilt were contagious. Not one spoke for her. In the cellar, she sat on the cold stone floor, and listened to the bolt close. Her wages, home, reputation, and freedom had vanished in a single afternoon. Worse, Daniel and his mother were being punished because they had shown her kindness. For the first time, despair pressed tears from her eyes. She allowed herself only a moment. Then something scratched behind the small ventilation grate near the ceiling. Bracken's muzzle appeared between the bars. He dropped a damp scrap of paper into the cellar. Beatrice reached up and caught it. The sheet bore a triangular torn edge that matched Oliver's forged note. Green flecks marked one corner, and across the top were the words Ashcombe Kennel Inventory. Beneath them, written in Silas's own hand, was a list of wagon numbers followed by a departure time. Siren, midnight tomorrow. Daniel must have found the scrap before his arrest and sent Bracken to deliver it. Beatrice studied the wagon numbers, then remembered the deep tracks in the preserve, and Oliver's account of two men arguing. The kidnapping had never been the true purpose. It was a distraction for something much larger, and whatever was being moved aboard the Siren was valuable enough for Silas to kill Caesar, frame two servants, and risk murdering the Duke himself. Beatrice folded the kennel inventory scrap and hid it inside the torn lining of her dress, just before footsteps sounded above the cellar. The bolt opened, and Magistrate Harcourt entered with two constables. Dawn had not yet broken, but the hall behind them blazed with candlelight. You are being moved earlier than planned, Harcourt said. Something has happened. Before Beatrice could ask what, a distant horn sounded from the front drive. It was not a hunting call. 3 sharp notes announced the arrival of royal officers. Harcourt took her upstairs, where Ashcombe Hall had descended into panic. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying locked document boxes. Edmund stood in the great hall facing Colonel Nathaniel Avery, an officer of the crown accompanied by 6 mounted soldiers. Silas remained at the Duke's right hand, dressed in a fresh coat, with a complete row of brass fox buttons. Beatrice understood at once that he had replaced the missing one. Colonel Avery's men had intercepted an abandoned wagon 5 miles from the estate. Inside were 12 crates of royal muskets and 2 barrels of powder stolen from the coastal armory. The wagon bore Ashcombe's crest, and its wheels carried black pine resin from the northern preserve. The weapons were meant to leave aboard the Siren tomorrow night, Avery said. We found the sailing order beneath the driver's seat. Edmund's face had gone white. My family has served the crown for generations. Then explain why a smuggling road crosses your land, and your estate wagons carry stolen arms. Silas stepped forward. Your men arrived at a fortunate time, Colonel. We uncovered the criminals yesterday. He pointed toward Beatrice and Daniel, who had been brought from the gatehouse in chains. The foreign coins, letters, poison vial, shipping manifest, and forged gate key were displayed again. Avery examined them without emotion. A maid and an under-gamekeeper stole weapons from a guarded royal armory? They had accomplices, Silas replied. The woman controlled the household deliveries. Mercer controlled the northern boundary. They poisoned the Duke's stallion, abducted his nephew, and used the confusion to move the final shipment. Beatrice looked at Edmund. I did not control deliveries. I carried lists between the kitchen and steward's office. Every order required Mr. Vale's countersignature whenever it involved the hunting establishment. Silas laughed. You expect us to believe a master of hounds approves military weapons? No. I expect Colonel Avery to examine what the crates were called on the estate records. Avery turned to Edmund. Bring me the delivery ledgers. The steward returned 10 minutes later with 3 heavy books. but the pages covering the previous 6 months had been cut out. Silas immediately blamed Beatrice. Mrs. Crowley confirmed that maids cleaned the steward's office each morning. Beatrice was not permitted to explain that she had never been assigned there. The colonel's patience thinned. Until the missing weapons are recovered, everyone in this house is under suspicion. There are more wagons, Beatrice said. The inventory lists 4 numbers. Silas's head turned sharply. She realized she had revealed possession of the scrap, but it was too late to retreat. Avery ordered her searched. A constable found the folded paper in her dress and handed it to him. Silas recovered quickly. There is the missing ledger page, hidden on the prisoner. It came from Bracken, Beatrice said. The Hound delivered it through the cellar grate. Several officers exchanged amused looks. Dogs now carry evidence? Harcourt asked. This one carried Oliver's glove when every man on the estate failed to find him. The laughter stopped. Avery studied the scrap. The handwriting matches Vale's signature in the surviving ledger. Anyone could imitate it, Silas said. The maid forged letters in her own name. She could forge mine. A kennel boy burst into the hall before Avery could answer. His face was streaked with tears. Mr. Vale, the hounds are sick. Beatrice forgot the chains and ran toward him. A constable caught her, but Edmund ordered him to release her. How many? She asked. 8 have fallen. Bracken will not let anyone near the others. Silas pointed at Beatrice. She fed those animals for months. Whatever poison she used on Caesar, she has now used on the pack. Beatrice was dragged to the kennels with the others following. 8 hounds lay on the straw, drooling and struggling to breathe. 4 remained standing behind Bracken, who guarded their untouched feeding trough. Beatrice knelt beside the nearest sick dog. The meat smelled faintly sweet beneath the blood. She recognized the odor from the medicine Silas used to quiet injured animals before stitching wounds. In a small dose, it caused sleep. In the quantity mixed into the food, it could stop their breathing. They were drugged, not poisoned, she said. We need to empty their stomachs and keep them moving. Silas scoffed. On the medical authority of a kitchen maid? On the experience of the woman who saved Bracken when you ordered him killed. She instructed the kennel boys to bring warm salt water, clean cloths, and charcoal from the cold hearth. The boys hesitated until Edmund shouted at them to obey. Beatrice worked despite the iron between her wrists. Daniel supported each animal while she forced small amounts of water into its mouth. After several agonizing minutes, the first hound vomited. 2 others followed. Bracken paced beside her, whining. Colonel Avery watched without speaking. Silas attempted to claim that he had already identified the sedative, but one kennel boy finally found his courage. Mr. Vale told us not to touch the meat until all 12 dogs had eaten. Silas struck the boy across the face. Avery's soldiers immediately stepped between them. The statement was not enough to arrest him, but doubt entered the room. Beatrice examined the feeding bucket. Black resin stained its handle, and beneath the bucket lay a curl of red sealing wax. The sea wren's manifest on the great hall table had been sealed in the same color. Before she could secure it, smoke rolled through the kennel doorway. Someone screamed that the northern storehouse was burning. Edmund ran outside and saw orange flames rising beyond the pines. The missing muskets and powder were believed to be stored there. If the fire reached the barrels, the explosion could destroy the workers' cottages and half the estate. Silas used the chaos instantly. Mercer built those stores, and the maid knew the wagons were listed. They started the fire to destroy their evidence. Colonel Avery ordered Daniel restrained again and told his soldiers to confine Beatrice. She looked toward the burning forest, then at the hounds struggling on the straw. Bracken seized the sleeve of her dress and pulled toward a narrow trail behind the kennels. Through the smoke, Beatrice heard the unmistakable thunder of several loaded wagons moving away from the fire, not toward the coastal road, but directly toward Ashcombe Hall. Beatrice knew from the rhythm of the wheels that the wagons were descending the hill without drivers. The sound grew louder through the smoke. Iron rims striking stones, harness chains whipping against wood, frightened horses galloping beyond control. They are coming down the kennel road, Daniel said. That road ended in the central courtyard, where dozens of servants, royal soldiers, and members of Edmund's household had gathered. If the wagons carried powder, Ashcombe Hall had only minutes. Silas shouted for everyone to flee, but Beatrice looked at the 4 hounds still standing behind Bracken. Remove my chains. Colonel Avery hesitated. If you run, there is nowhere to run if those barrels explode. Edmund took the constable's key and unlocked her himself. Beatrice opened the kennel gate. Bracken and the healthy hounds surged toward the trail but stopped when she gave a low whistle. Bring stable blankets and buckets of water, she told the kennel boys. Daniel, I need the strongest lead ropes. Silas grabbed Edmund's arm. She intends to release the horses and destroy the evidence. Then give me a better plan, Edmund said. Silas had none. Beatrice ran toward the courtyard entrance, her soaked skirt dragging through mud. The first wagon burst from the smoke with 2 draft horses foaming at the mouth. A burning fuse trailed from a barrel beneath the driver's bench. Beatrice sent Bracken wide to the left and the other hounds to the right, using the same hand signals she had watched the huntmaster employ for years. The dogs formed a moving wall. The horses saw them and veered, but Beatrice stepped into the open space and raised both arms. Easy. Stand, my beauties. One horse tried to turn while the other pulled forward, forcing the wagon sideways and slowing it. Daniel caught the near bridle. Beatrice seized the far one, pressing her full weight against the animal's shoulder, while a stable boy threw a blanket over its eyes. Colonel Avery's soldiers poured water over the fuse. It died less than a yard from the barrel. A second wagon thundered from the trees. This one had no visible fuse, but smoke poured from beneath its canvas. Daniel pushed Beatrice aside moments before the wheel struck her. He jumped onto the rear axle, cut through the right trace, and forced the wagon toward the ornamental pond. The horse broke free. The wagon rolled into the water, throwing Daniel against the stone edge. Beatrice heard the crack of his shoulder before he disappeared beneath the surface. She plunged after him without thinking. The pond reached only to her chest, but the overturned wagon pinned Daniel's coat beneath one wheel. She tore the fabric with both hands and dragged him above water. His face was gray with pain, and his right arm hung unnaturally. The third wagon, he gasped. Bracken had already reached it. The lead hound bit through a dangling rein while the kennel boys threw ropes around the horses. The fourth wagon stopped when one wheel shattered against the gatepost. Within 5 minutes, all 4 vehicles had been secured. No explosion came, but the courtyard had fallen silent. Beatrice knelt beside Daniel until the physician arrived. "You saved me at the gate," she told him. "I merely returned the favor," he said through clenched teeth. "My mother will still say I ruined a good coat." The physician carried him inside with a broken shoulder and 2 cracked ribs. The cost of helping her had become more than his position and cottage. Beatrice watched until he disappeared, then returned to the wagons. Colonel Avery opened the first powder barrel. Beneath a shallow layer of black powder lay wrapped musket parts bearing the Royal Armory mark. The remaining wagons contained rifles, ammunition, foreign coins, and 3 boxes of official seals stolen from the customs office. This was no small poaching operation. Someone had used Ashcombe land to move weapons across the coast for months. Beneath the seat of the third wagon, Bracken found a locked leather dispatch case. Beatrice recognized the broken clasp from the hunting lodge. Silas claimed he had never seen it. "You carried that case beneath your coat yesterday," Beatrice said. "Mercer saw it as well. Mercer is unconscious and accused of treason. He was conscious enough to save this house." Avery broke the lock. Inside were kennel inventory sheets, copies of shipping orders, and a book recording payments to wagon drivers. The triangular missing corner on the uppermost sheet fitted Oliver's forged note exactly. The green flecks came from paint used on Silas's training lines. 2 earlier lies now rested side by side on the colonel's table. Lady Margaret arrived holding Oliver's brass fox button. She placed it beside Silas's coat. The design, size, and broken thread matched the place where a new button had been hastily sewn. "My son found this in the lodge," she said. Silas did not flinch. "I lost it during the rescue." "You entered through the front door," Beatrice replied. "Oliver found it beside the rear hearth, where the kidnapper stood before we arrived." Avery ordered 2 soldiers to guard Silas while he examined the payment book. For the first time, fear showed openly on the master of Hounds' face. Yet Avery did not arrest him. Several pages had been written in different hands, and the largest payments were authorized only by the initials GP. Oliver had heard 2 men arguing. Silas was one, but someone else controlled the ship, the customs seals, and perhaps the stolen armory weapons. Beatrice examined the recovered delivery sheets. Numbers from Daniel's scrap appeared beside false descriptions such as dog meal, lamp oil, and timber tools. Her memory supplied what the missing household ledgers could not. She had carried several of those orders to the steward's office. Each had been sealed before Silas received it. "These quantities changed after the papers left the kitchen," she said. "Someone added a 0 to every order." Avery compared the ink. The altered numbers were darker. Fragile hope moved through the courtyard. Edmund ordered Beatrice and Daniel released from criminal confinement until the evidence could be reviewed. Silas, however, smiled when Avery opened the final compartment of the dispatch case. Inside lay an authorization bearing Edmund's personal seal and signature. It instructed Silas Vale to transport all Crown property held at Ashcombe to the Sea Wren and destroy the northern records afterward. Colonel Avery read the order twice, then turned toward the Duke. "This changes everything. Edmund stared at his own signature. I never wrote that. The seal is yours. Royal soldiers surrounded him. Silas's fear disappeared. Beatrice looked from the forged order to the Duke's signet ring, and understood the deeper problem. Silas could copy handwriting and steal paper, but Edmund's personal seal had never left his hand, except during the 3 days after his father's funeral, when it had been locked inside the family chapel with the body. Colonel Avery ordered Edmund's signet ring removed, and compared it with the seal on the transport authorization. The running stag, the crown above its antlers, and the tiny Ashcombe motto beneath were identical. Until this document is disproved, Your Grace cannot command the investigation, Avery said. Edmund surrendered his sword and was confined to his study under royal guard. Silas bowed his head as if grieved by the Duke's disgrace, then offered Avery full access to the estate. I served his Grace faithfully, he said. I had no choice but to obey an order bearing his hand and seal. Beatrice understood his new defense. He would admit moving the wagons while claiming Edmund commanded everything. The maid, Daniel, and perhaps the steward, would become disposable accomplices. Colonel Avery allowed Beatrice 1 hour to explain how the seal had been copied. She asked to examine the family chapel and the records from the late Duke's funeral. Silas objected that she was inventing another delay, but Avery agreed. The chapel stood at the eastern edge of the estate. Edmund's father had lain there for 3 days before burial, and the current Duke's signet had been placed beside the coffin after each legal document was sealed. Beatrice remembered carrying hot water and black cloths to the chapel during that week. The steward, Gareth Pritchard, had supervised the funeral accounts, while Silas guarded the doors at night. When Avery summoned Pritchard, they learned that he had left Ashcombe before dawn, supposedly to warn coastal officials about the sea wren. The initials GP in the payment ledger suddenly had a name. Soldiers were dispatched after him. Inside the chapel vestry, Beatrice found the box that had contained the funeral wax, but every remaining seal impression had been scraped from the documents. The ashes in the small stove were still warm. Silas claimed Pritchard must have destroyed them to protect Edmund, or to prevent us from comparing them with the forged order, Beatrice replied. Avery returned to the hall carrying the authorization, the dispatch case, and the surviving payment ledger. He placed everything inside a guarded evidence room. Beatrice's hope lasted less than 15 minutes. A musket fired from the upper gallery. One royal soldier fell wounded. The candles were knocked over, and smoke filled the corridor. By the time the flames were extinguished, the evidence room had been forced open. The payment ledger and kennel inventory pages were gone. The dispatch case had been thrown into the fire, and the transport authorization had burned almost entirely, leaving only the sealed lower corner. The attacker escaped through a servant's staircase. Silas immediately accused Beatrice. She knew those papers condemned her. She was standing beside me when the shot was fired, Lady Margaret said. Mercer could have arranged it, Silas replied. Daniel lay unconscious beneath the physician's care, but no one could prove he had not given instructions earlier. Worse followed. Soldiers returning from Daniel's cottage found a hidden musket bearing the royal armory mark. In Beatrice's attic room, they discovered the missing steward's ledger pages, sewn inside her mattress, directly beneath the foreign coins found earlier. The pages named Beatrice and Daniel as organizers of the smuggling route. Every apparent proof she had gained was now destroyed, while the evidence against her multiplied. Colonel Avery's expression closed. He ordered Beatrice returned to the cellar, Daniel guarded in his sickbed, and Edmund held for transport to the royal court. Silas was placed temporarily in charge of the estate's horses and roads because, as he reminded everyone, only he knew the hunting routes well enough to help intercept Pritchard. By sunset, he controlled every gate at Ashcombe. He stood in the courtyard before the servants and announced that the criminal maid would leave in chains at first light. No one challenged him. Mrs. Bell began to cry but remained silent. Peter hid behind the stable door. Even Lady Margaret was forbidden to approach Beatrice. Bracken and the recovering hounds were locked in separate kennels. For the first time since the hunt began, Silas appeared to have won completely. In the cellar, Beatrice sat alone with her back against the cold wall. Her shoulder throbbed from the gate, her wrists were bruised by iron, and her wet uniform had dried stiff with mud. Daniel was injured because of her. His mother had lost her cottage. Oliver remained in danger. Edmund, cruel enough to release hounds on an untried servant yet innocent of treason, could lose his name and freedom. Beatrice wondered whether her silence had protected anyone, or merely given Silas time to destroy them one by one. Above her, the estate bells marked midnight. She covered her face and wept without sound. Then a draft moved across the floor. Something pale fluttered from the ventilation grate. Not paper, but a small flake of hardened black wax. Pippin's paw appeared between the bars, scratching insistently. Oliver must have sent him through the servants' passage. Beatrice picked up the wax. One side bore part of the Ashcombe stag seal. The other held the faint impression of a black pine needle. Memory returned with sudden clarity. During the late Duke's funeral, a storm had blown the chapel doors open while the sealing wax was warm. Beatrice had removed pine needles from the altar cloth, but one had become trapped in the seal on the coffin inventory. Gareth Pritchard had laughed and said no one would notice such a tiny flaw. The wax in her hand came from that original funeral impression. Oliver must have found it where the conspirators dropped it. Beatrice examined the burned fragment of the forged authorization that had clung to her sleeve when the evidence room caught fire. Its seal contained the same narrow pine needle groove. Edmund's metal ring could not reproduce a mark caused by debris in a single piece of funeral wax. The false stamp had been cast from that exact impression, while the signet was locked in the chapel. Silas had destroyed the documents but overlooked the smallest thing: a maid's memory of cleaning the altar after a storm. Beatrice rose. Her gentle face remained unchanged, but despair gave way to controlled resolve. The evidence proved how the seal had been copied. Now she needed to preserve it, free the one witness Silas could not frighten, and force Gareth Pritchard to return before the sea wren sailed. From beyond the cellar door came the soft scrape of a key. Beatrice hid the wax in her hair as the lock turned, expecting Lady Margaret or Oliver. Instead, Silas entered carrying a pistol and Bracken's blood-stained collar. Silas closed the cellar door behind him and laid Bracken's blood-stained collar on the floor. "The dog fought when I ordered him destroyed," he said. "The others will follow at dawn unless you sign a confession." Beatrice looked at the collar without bending down. The leather had been cut near the buckle, but the blood lay only on the outer edge. A few coarse gray threads clung to it, the same color as Silas's hunting glove. Bracken had bitten him and escaped. Silas wanted her to believe the hound was dead because fear made prisoners careless. "What must I confess?" she asked. "That Edmund ordered the weapons moved, Daniel built the road, and you forged the household records. You will also state that Gareth Pritchard knew nothing. Pritchard is your partner." Silas's pistol rose. "Pritchard is a frightened accountant who will repeat whatever keeps him alive." "Then why protect him?" "Because he knows where the sea wren's remaining money is hidden." The answer revealed more than Silas intended. Beatrice lowered her eyes, pretending defeat. "If I sign privately, you will destroy the paper after I am gone, and kill the dogs anyway. What do you suggest? Read it before Colonel Avery, the servants, and the Duke. Make everyone hear the bargain. Swear publicly that Bracken and Daniel's mother will be spared." Silas studied her. He mistook the request for a condemned woman's need to save the few lives remaining to her. "At sunrise," he said, "if you speak one word beyond the confession, the dog dies first." He unlocked her chains but kept the pistol against her back, while leading her through the servants' corridor. Beatrice passed the infirmary stairs and saw Pippin watching from beneath a bench. She allowed the burned seal fragment hidden in her sleeve to fall beside him, then touched her hair where the funeral wax remained concealed. Pippin sniffed the fragment. "Find Oliver," she whispered. Silas struck her shoulder and ordered her forward. The great hall was already being prepared for the royal inquiry. Colonel Avery intended to question the household publicly before taking Edmund, Beatrice, and Daniel away. Servants stood along the walls. Lady Margaret sat beside Oliver, whose bandaged head rested against her arm. Daniel had been carried in on a narrow couch, his broken shoulder bound tightly. Edmund stood between two soldiers without his sword. Silas placed Beatrice in the center of the room and announced that she had chosen to confess. A murmur spread among the servants. Mrs. Bell began crying again. Daniel tried to rise, but pain forced him back. "Do not believe him," he said. Silas unfolded a prepared statement. Beatrice Hale admits that Duke Edmund directed the theft of royal weapons. Daniel Mercer opened the northern road. She forged the shipping records and abducted Oliver Ashcombe when the Duke feared discovery. Beatrice looked toward the entrance. Pippin had reached Oliver and dropped the burned seal fragment into his hand. The boy passed it to Lady Margaret, who concealed it beneath her glove. Silas offered Beatrice a pen. "Sign. You promise to spare the Hounds and Mrs. Mercer. I give my word before every person here." "And Gareth Pritchard?" Silas's eyes narrowed. "He is innocent." The great doors opened before Beatrice could respond. Two royal soldiers entered with Gareth Pritchard between them. The steward's coat was torn, and black pine resin stained both knees. They had captured him less than a mile from the coastal road, while he tried to reach the sea wren. Silas recovered quickly. "This is the man Beatrice intended to blame." Pritchard stared at him. "You said the maid would be dead before sunrise." Avery ordered silence. Beatrice put down the pen. "Colonel, before I sign, may I ask Mr. Vale 3 questions?" You are in no position to question anyone, Silas said. Then you fear the questions. Avery granted her permission. Beatrice faced Silas. You testified that my knife was found beside Caesar's body. Who removed it? I did. Who sealed it as evidence? I did. Who questioned Peter before anyone else heard his account? I did. As master of hounds, the stables fall under my authority. The stables do not, Edmund said. Only the kennels. Silas had overcommitted to the lie. Beatrice turned to Peter. What did the person leaving Caesar's stall wear? The stable boy trembled. Silas reminded him that his employment depended upon honesty. Peter looked at Beatrice, then at Oliver. Tall riding boots with silver heels. Beatrice owns no boots. Whose boots did you recognize? Mr. Vale's. Silence moved across the hall. Beatrice next displayed the green-painted rope from Oliver's bindings, and asked the kennel boys where it was stored. They confirmed that only Silas held the key. Mrs. Bell finally stepped forward and swore that Beatrice had been in the kitchen when Oliver vanished. Mrs. Crowley admitted that Silas had requested access to the laundry room the previous evening, claiming he needed cloths for an injured dog. One by one, frightened people recovered their courage. Lady Margaret placed the brass fox button beside Silas's coat. Daniel described the dispatch case at the lodge. The kennel boy repeated that Silas had ordered all 12 hounds to eat the drugged meat. Silas laughed, but the sound was too loud. Servants protecting one of their own. None of this proves the Duke's seal was forged. No, Beatrice said, but this does. She removed the black wax from her hair, while Lady Margaret gave Colonel Avery the burned fragment of the authorization. Beatrice explained the storm during the late Duke's funeral, the pine needle trapped inside one particular wax impression, and the fact that Edmund's metal ring could never reproduce an accidental groove unless someone had cast a false stamp from that funeral seal. Silas stepped backward. Beatrice had not yet finished. Mr. Vale claimed Pritchard was innocent before he knew the steward had been captured. He also told me Pritchard knew where the Sea Wren's money was hidden. Only a partner could know both facts. Pritchard's face collapsed. He promised me half, he whispered. Silas drew his pistol and pointed it at Oliver. Another word and the boy dies. Bracken burst through the open doors with the remaining hounds behind him. Silas's pistol swung toward the pack. Beatrice gave one quiet command. Kneel. Every hound dropped at once, leaving Silas exposed in the center of the hall, while Colonel Avery held the two wax seals side by side beneath a magnifying lens. The colonel's expression changed. He looked up at Silas and said, "The groove is identical." Colonel Avery's words broke the last protection around Silas. The servants who had once laughed at Beatrice now watched him with open horror. His pistol remained pointed toward Oliver, but his hand had begun to shake. "The wax proves nothing," he said. A kitchen maid invented a story about a pine needle. Avery placed the funeral wax beside the burned authorization. Under magnification, the narrow groove crossed the stag's left antler at precisely the same angle in both impressions. Edmund's metal signet showed no such mark. The authorization was made with a counterfeit stamp cast from the funeral seal, Avery said. Someone entered the chapel while the Duke's ring was locked there. Beatrice looked at Pritchard. You prepared the funeral accounts. Mr. Vale guarded the chapel doors. You had the wax, the paper, and access to the seal. Pritchard's remaining courage collapsed. He admitted that Silas had recruited him after discovering his gambling debts. Together they copied Edmund's signature from estate orders and cast a false stamp from the wax impression on the coffin inventory. Pritchard altered household ledgers, while Silas opened the Northern Preserve, trained wagon drivers to use hidden roads, and disguised shipments of stolen weapons as kennel supplies. The Sea Wren carried the cargo to foreign buyers. Liar, Silas shouted. You planned everything. I altered numbers, Pritchard replied. You killed the horse. You took the boy. Silas backed toward the doors, dragging Oliver in front of him. Bracken and the other hounds remained kneeling, awaiting Beatrice's command. Tell them to stay down, Silas ordered. They already are, Beatrice said. She moved slowly between Oliver and the pistol. Silas laughed with the same contempt he had shown in the hunting enclosure. Still pretending to be brave? You are a fat servant who mistook a few obedient dogs for power. Beatrice did not flinch. No, you mistook gentleness for helplessness. Pippin crept behind Silas and bit into his boot. His pistol jerked downward. Beatrice pulled Oliver aside as the weapon fired into the floor. Bracken, guard. The lead hound sprang up and closed his jaws around Silas's gun arm without tearing the flesh. The remaining dogs rose and surrounded him. Silas tried to strike Bracken with his free hand, but Colonel Avery's soldiers seized him and forced him to his knees, the same position in which the hounds had placed themselves before Beatrice. This time no one laughed. Avery recovered the pistol while Lady Margaret took Oliver into her arms. Bracken released Silas only when Beatrice touched his scarred neck and whispered, "Enough." Her restraint mattered more than vengeance. She could have allowed the Hound to maul the man who had tried to kill them both, but she chose justice before the entire household. With Silas disarmed, Pritchard gave a complete account. 3 nights earlier, Silas had stolen Beatrice's knife, spare uniform, and marked cap, while claiming he needed cloth for an injured dog. He poisoned Caesar with a concentrated kennel sedative, because the stallion had become uncontrollable whenever the weapons wagons passed the stable. More importantly, Beatrice had entered after midnight and noticed black resin on the horse's flank. Silas feared that her knowledge of animals would expose the false explanation for Caesar's death. He left her knife beside the stall, pressured Peter into describing only a broad figure in gray, and convinced Edmund that releasing the hounds would provide a swift punishment before Beatrice could speak publicly. Silas expected trained hunting instinct to overcome their affection for her. Instead, Bracken remembered the woman who had saved his life. When the pack knelt, Silas's carefully staged execution became the first crack in his plan. Pritchard confessed that he had worn Beatrice's spare dress and veil to lure Oliver north. The forged note exploited the boy's love for Pippin. Silas joined him at the lodge, where they argued over the final payment. His brass fox button fell beside the hearth. They bound Oliver, tied Beatrice's marked cloth to Pippin, and planted food, poison, and burned clothing so she would appear both kidnapper and rescuer. The wagon tracks, black pine resin, green kennel rope, triangular paper edge, copied handwriting, fox button, drugged hounds, and counterfeit seal were not separate accidents. Each originated from the same 2 offices, Silas's kennels and Pritchard's ledgers. The evidence could be proven now because Beatrice had preserved what they considered too small to matter. Oliver retained the button. Daniel sent the inventory scrap through Bracken before his arrest. Lady Margaret protected the burned seal fragment. Pippin recovered the funeral wax. Peter finally identified the silver-heeled boots. The kennel boys confirmed who controlled the rope, medicine, and feeding order. No single clue depended on Beatrice's word alone. Together they formed a chain Silas could no longer break. Royal riders reached the coast before noon and seized the sea wren with the remaining weapons and payment chests aboard. Pritchard's records identified the drivers and buyers. He was taken into custody to face judgment, with his cooperation recorded by Colonel Avery. Silas was charged with weapons theft, kidnapping, attempted murder, arson, forgery, and conspiracy against the crown. As soldiers led him through the courtyard, the hounds watched in silence from beside Beatrice. He called them traitorous beasts. Bracken did not even growl. Silas had become unworthy of the dog's attention. Edmund was cleared of the forged order, but relief did not excuse his cruelty. Before the servants assembled in the same courtyard where he had released the pack, he removed his hat and faced Beatrice. "I condemned you without a hearing. I allowed class, anger, and another man's lies to make me cruel. No reward can erase that." To the astonishment of the household, the Duke bowed to the plus-size maid, whose death he had once treated as entertainment. "I ask your forgiveness." Beatrice did not offer it cheaply. "Forgiveness is not permission to forget, your grace. No servant on this estate should ever again be punished because a noble finds humiliation amusing." Edmund accepted her conditions. Daniel was appointed head gamekeeper after his recovery, and his mother received permanent rights to her cottage. The kennel boys were protected from dismissal for testifying. Peter kept his position after admitting how fear had silenced him. Mrs. Bell and Mrs. Crowley apologized directly to Beatrice. Her lost wages and pension were restored threefold, but she refused a decorative title that would remove her from the servants whose lives needed changing. She remained a maid, promoted to senior household maid with authority to report abuses directly to Lady Margaret and Edmund. She also assumed oversight of the kennel's food and care. Months later, visitors to Ashcombe still saw a full-figured woman in a practical gray uniform crossing the courtyard with Bracken beside her. Her face remained gentle, her voice quiet, and her body unchanged. But no one mistook quietness for weakness anymore. Oliver often joined her with Pippin, and Daniel greeted her from the rebuilt northern gate. One spring morning, Edmund's guests arrived for the first hunt since Silas's arrest. The 12 hounds ran across the courtyard toward Beatrice. Several newcomers stepped back in alarm. At one soft word from her, every animal sat calmly around her skirts. The people who knew the story smiled, not because the dogs had submitted, but because they had recognized her worth long before the humans did.